In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln enacted the Emancipation Proclamation. West Virginia became a state, and the Union Army won major victories at Vicksburg and Gettysburg on July the 4th. And on July the 13th, Confederate General John Hunt Morgan entered into the state of Ohio with his raiders. John Hunt Morgan was born in 1825 in Huntsville, Alabama. Shortly after, his family moved to Lexington, Kentucky. In 1846, he fought in the Mexican War at the Battle of Buena Vista as a lieutenant. After the death of his wife in 1861, he formed the 2nd Kentucky Cavalry for the Confederate States. On June the 27th, 1863, he was given 2,460 men and 4 artillery pieces, with orders to raid into Tennessee and Kentucky, but to remain below the Ohio River. On July the 8th, Morgan disobeyed these orders as he and his men rode into Indiana. 5 days later, they would make their way into Ohio. By July the 16th, the citizens of Jackson County still expected Morgan to head south toward Portsmouth, so sure that they sent their county militia there to assist in defending the city. The Union command believed this as well, as evidenced by this dispatch to Colonel Kinney in Portsmouth. Sufficient forces on the road and will reach you before Morgan can. Miscalculations like this helped to ensure that Morgan was one step ahead of his Union adversaries. He was well aware of a river crossing at Buffington Island in Meigs County and determined to make it there. 27-year-old Colonel Benjamin P. Runkle was stationed at Chillicothe, ready to obstruct Morgan's path if he turned north. But when it was learned that Morgan crossed the Scioto River and was heading east instead of south, he was ordered to get ready to move. Colonel Runkle, Chillicothe, get your men and cars ready to start and await orders. How soon can you be ready? Major General Burnside. As evening came, so too did word that Morgan's men were on their way to the city of Jackson. The Provost Marshal tried to assemble men in arms to erect a hastily built roadblock at the intersection of Main Street and Broadway, where the courthouse and the Cambrian now stand. When the advance guard of the rebel cavalry crested the hill on Main Street, the home guard ran for their lives. What men were found were taken to the fairgrounds where the Jackson School track now stands. The consensus was they would be killed in the morning. Word quickly spread that the raiders were in Jackson, and General Burnside ordered Colonel Runkle to take the train to Hamden Junction from Chillicothe, and from there to intercept Morgan. At about 10 p.m., General Morgan himself rode into town. He and his staff stayed at the Isham House, which was located where the Cambrian now stands. There wasn't going to be much rest. It was going to prove to be a long night. At about midnight, the raiders set fire to the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad Depot. The light from the fire could be seen at the fairgrounds by the prisoners. Homes and businesses were searched for goods the rebels wanted. Barns broken into, horses stolen. After reviewing a pro-Union newspaper from the Standard, Morgan's men entered the paper office and destroyed the press. Raiders entered the Masonic Lodge and stole the Tyler sword, but when Morgan saw the sword and regalia, and he himself being a Mason, he ordered it all returned to the lodge. After dawn, the local men were moved from the fairgrounds into town and paroled. Morgan's men got ready to move out, his forces being divided into 2 units, one heading southeast on the road to Gallipolis, and the other east toward Wilkesville, toward Berlin Crossroads. Around 2 a.m., Colonel Runkle arrived at Hamden Station. He then moved his troops south through the farmland, which is now Wellston, to Berlin Crossroads. He put his men up to the heights on the northeast part of town, with skirmishers inside the town itself. Most of the residents of Berlin had fled, knowing that the rebels were on their way and no doubt a fight would follow. When the Raiders' scouts reached Berlin, they were met by Union pickets. One rebel was shot in the shoulder as they fled back to warn the others. Colonel Basil Duke, the brother-in-law of General Morgan, led his men to the hills west of Berlin Crossroads. There, they could see the skirmishers in the town and the troops on the hills northeast. They had no idea if the Union forces had any artillery, so Duke had his 2 3-inch rifled Parrott artillery pieces fire. From their position, the raiders began to shell the heights, while the cavalry began to advance to the south and to the north to flank the troops. The shelling continued for a half hour to an hour. More militia arrived at Hamden and could hear the cannonade. Their orders were to double quick down to Berlin for support. The rebel cavalry advanced and caught fire to the Hunziker flour mill on the west end of town, its smoke no doubt covering movements from the Union. Confederates began to fire in advance, and with it the Union forces began to fall back and move over the heights and regroup and withdraw. This opened up the road to Wilkesville for the rebels to travel. By 2 o'clock, the battle for Berlin Heights was over. Reports differ on casualties. Somewhere between 5 to 12 Confederates were killed. The militia headed back to Hamden Station, where they boarded their trains, and the rebels continued on to Wilkesville. The Battle of Berlin Heights was successful at one thing. It delayed the Confederates at a crucial time when the Union was in hot pursuit. This helped to remove their window of opportunity for a safe crossing at Buffington Island. The Battle of Buffington Island was fought on July the 19th and a disaster for Morgan's raiders. Over half of his raiders were captured, with Morgan and 700 escaping. On July the 26th, he and his men finally surrendered after the Battle of Salineville. On November the 27th, Morgan escaped from the Ohio Penitentiary and made his way back to Kentucky. On September 4th, 1864, he was surprised and killed by Union cavalry in Greenville, Tennessee. He's buried in Lexington Cemetery.